The flagship, even though I'm on YouTube, the flagship station is Rumble. So please subscribe at Rumble. And at Getter, I am now live. And Getter is this amazing new social network that I really urge people to check out. Austin Roos is my guest. He is the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights. He is the author of Under Siege, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. Austin, obviously, we have an earth-shattering and momentous event, the reversal of Roe versus Wade, something that I really never thought I would see. You know, I became discouraged when I saw Republican presidents like the Bushes, appoint judges that really didn't seem to have enough fire in the belly to take a look at the actual Constitution of the United States and realize that an issue like abortion is not a federal issue. It's not in the Constitution, but it's something that can be regulated by the states, which of course is the Democratic approach. And the left loves to talk about democracy. Well, that's what we've got right now, a return of power to the respective states and their state legislators to regulate these matters. So I think it's a great day to celebrate. Austin, what say you?
Well, of course, we're all exceedingly happy that this happened. It dawned on me over the weekend that the most exciting thing about this is that I can actually now go to my state house, down the road in Richmond, Virginia, and talk to the legislators there and try to make something happen in my state. Prior to Friday, there was this great big boulder in our way called Roe v. Wade, such that nothing authentic, nothing real could happen with regard to abortion because, Roe was supposedly the law of the land. The pro-lifers got very creative over the years and passed, a few hundred state laws that hampered the work of abortion clinics, for instance, that required them to have the standards of surgical centers, wide enough hallways for, gurneys and all that kind of stuff, and requiring abortionists to have visiting privileges with the local hospital. So, and then eventually waiting periods and heartbeat bills and things like that. But still, it was all geared toward either hampering the work of abortion clinics or hoping that some court will take it on and the issue will advance eventually to the Supreme Court, which is what happened. But now I can march down to Richmond, Virginia. I live in Virginia, and talk to pound on some doors and explain things to state legislators, including mine, and see if we could actually make something happen. This was not the case last Thursday. It's the case today.
Oh, I mean, the Supreme Court can change the whole paradigm of how we govern ourselves, how we see ourselves with one decision. I remember I'm old enough to remember in the early 1960s when school prayer was removed, which is, oh, by the way, also unconstitutional because that's a state matter. And I remember President Kennedy was shocked and said so, and noted that this is a radical change in how America conducted itself. And of course, we've seen what's happened since then in our schools. But getting back to the issue of
let's not skip over that so rapidly, because I wrote in my book Under Siege, I wrote a lot about this. The Regent's Prayer is what we're talking about in New York State, and it was a fairly anodyne prayer. Lord, Father in heaven, protect our mothers and fathers and our leaders and things like that. I mean, it wasn't highly controversial.
No, and it was very non-sectarian. It was just a recognition of the creator of the universe that is the same creator that's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence and on the masthead of the Supreme Court itself.
And it was written by a Catholic priest, a Protestant minister, and a Jewish rabbi. And when it was challenged, 11 out of 13 New York State judges supported school prayer, and it was only overturned when it got to the Supreme Court, and then it was 6-1. And every governor in the nation complained about it, except the New York State governor. And there were editorials coast to coast. There were calls for the impeachment of Earl Warren. And you're exactly right. It did change everything The case the following year that kicked Bible out of school was even more controversial because it said that the object and purpose of government had to be secular. And to me, as I argue in the book, this put the thumb on the scale of a long time debate in this United States about who we are as a people. And here it said who we are as a people is we are no longer a Christian people, we are a secular people. And
Right.
and then followed from that was Griswold and Eisenstadt and Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton and Lawrence v. Texas and Obergefell. And all of that flowed from the overturning of this notion that we are a Christian people, even though we still are.
That's right, with a small c, of course, not a denominationally Christian people. But the prayer decision should never have even been in the Supreme Court. It was a jurisdictional matter, and that the Constitution leaves those kinds of questions, Article 9 and Article 10, to the states. So they should never have really been allowed to pick that up. But that's, I think, water under the bridge at this point.
Wait a second. I don't think it is water under the bridge.
Okay.
All of these things are being revisited.
Okay.
I have an article here by John McGinnis called "The Death of Separationism and the Life of School Choice." All of these questions are going to be revisited, including the so-called separation of church and state. So, the water under the bridge is coming back.
I guess the water's starting to rise. I think that it's safe to say that if you look at the history of the Republic, questions of religion really were left to the states, and that in fact, and I'm not an advocate of this, the respective states had state religions right up through the early part of the 19th century. That kind of disappeared over time by the will of the people in the respective states, because you did have a multiplicity of denominational religions. And I don't believe that needs to come back. But, it nevertheless, on a constitutional level, is a state matter. It's not the federal government's business to get into those matters at all, which is the basis of removing the Roe versus Wade decision, and which is why this is, in a way, quite revolutionary. It's a reversal of a trend, as you say, that's gone on since the days of the prayer in school. I would trace it back to Roosevelt's attempt to pack the Supreme Court, and the reaction by the Supreme Court at that time, which was to cave in completely to Roosevelt. All of a sudden, we now have a Supreme Court that is exercising its constitutional muscle and saying this is they're opening the Constitution, they're reading it, and they're saying these are matters that are up to the states. Now, it seems like obviously the Catholic Church deserves to be applauded and lauded for decades of work on this matter. And I do applaud the Catholic Church, even though I'm not Catholic. But I think that the issue that started the ball rolling recently was the law in Texas, the so-called heartbeat law, which I think was brilliantly named because everyone understands what a heartbeat is. And what it is that basically abortion could not happen unless the life of the mother was at risk after 12 weeks of pregnancy. Now, we find out after the fact, after Roe versus Wade has been overturned, that this is the laws of most nations in the world, including nations that we thought of as liberal, like France and the Netherlands and Germany and Italy, that, they all have laws like this. Only the United States, apparently, maybe communist China, maybe North Korea, accepted, had a law that declared an abortion rule on a federal level. And that, that in a way, we are now going back to a more normal means of governing ourselves by the states in the same way that European states do when you're deciding these very profound moral issues like life and death, things like abortion, death penalty, euthanasia. These are profound issues that transcend party, they transcend ideology, they even transcend religion. They are issues that every nation has to grapple with. And the best way to do it in the American system is by democratic means, local representatives who represent the interests and the beliefs of their respective constituents, debating and deciding on these questions. So now that I've ranted along here, what say you?
Boy, that was a lousy question.
Well, I guess
I would just point out one tiny error, that the laws in Europe were in fact decided at the federal level, but they were decided by parliamentary measures, that is to say, democratically with the input of the people. But you're exactly correct, and this is something that we have known for a long, long time. My organization, we work at the international level exclusively. We work primarily at the United Nations, but also around the world. And we have known for a very long time what would shock the left in this country, and that is that European countries have better pro-life laws than we have up until last Friday. They have gestational limits of 12, 14, 16 weeks. And I used to say that the American left would have an aneurysm if we had the same law, if we had the same laws as they have in Europe. And now it looks like in most of the states we are going to have that. And this is actually one of my fears, is that there's going to be a settlement. In Europe, there's not much of a pro-life movement for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the decisions were made democratically. Second of all, because I think that most people are content to allow for abortion in the first 14 or 15 weeks. And that's my fear, that that's what's going to be settled here in the United States. And that the wind will go out of the sails of the pro-life movement. Just like it's never really been gathered in Europe. But we shall see. We shall see. We have had, up until Friday, the most radical abortion laws in the world, with the exception of China, North Korea, and Canada. So yeah, and it's
Canada's become very communist anyway.
I read the Times of London, and I look at the comment boxes on the American abortion stories. And the people over there are outraged that democracy is leaving the United States because we're going to have the same abortion laws as they do. And they don't understand the kind of abortion laws that they have. So it's one of the great tricks of the pro-choice movement, to confuse people about what the abortion laws really do. Most of them cannot tell you what Roe did or what Doe did. That Doe defined health so broad as to give us abortion on demand. So there's a lot of dishonesty in the abortion debate in this country and around the world.
Now, I've noticed some of the protests outside the Supreme Court and even in the cities, including my own city of Boston, include a pretty large contingent of pro-life people, and they tend to be younger people. They tend to be, college age, even teenage, whereas the old, hard, pro-choicers are, older women and, older people. And I think that's because younger people are more in tune to the actual science, which has been suppressed, which shows what abortion actually is and what it actually does. I mean, I became aware of this one time when my wife and I got off an airplane in Boston, and we always noticed in Orient Heights, you could see on the top of the hill, this enormous Catholic shrine. And we decided one day we would drive up there to see what it was. And it was this enormous statue of the Virgin Mary that was probably about 3 stories high. But underneath the statue was this little room that you went into. And so we went in there, and in there they had an exhibition about abortion that was completely scientific. It didn't mention anything about religion. And it had pictures, it had film, and it completely changed my point of view on this topic. I really saw what it was, and it was ugly. And I really became aware of the fact that this is a person, this is a child, and that I saw what they were doing to that child, and it woke me up. So I think that younger people, because of the science and because of advances in science, such as ultrasound, they see what it is.
Well, that's exactly right. A number of things I think really were seminal moments in the pro-life debate in the United States. One of them was the partial birth abortion debate, because that really showed people in a very graphic way a brutal procedure, that it's a violation of human rights. So the partial birth abortion debate, I think, was extremely important. Even Francis Kissling, who at that time ran this heretical group called Catholics for Free Choice, said that the partial birth abortion debate lost her and her movement a lot of what she called moderate pro-choice Catholics. And sure. Naomi Wolf, the radical feminist writer, published a Substack yesterday in which he pointed to the radicalism of the feminist movement on the question of abortion over time. And then, precisely as you say, the first baby picture now is the baby on the refrigerator in utero. The 4D sonogram. And so you can see very clearly that this is somebody who looks an awful lot like us. And so I think that those two things, the partial birth abortion, those three things, the partial birth abortion debate, the fact that the feminists held on to partial birth abortion and therefore exposed their radicalism. And then third, the photos of the unborn child in utero really changed a lot of minds.
I think it did. And also we should note that Planned Parenthood, when they bring women in for ultrasounds, they don't let them see it.
Yeah.
Because they don't want them to bond with the baby, and because they want to take a look at it so they can see which body parts to I don't want to get into this because I'll get banned on YouTube. Let's just leave it at that. There is an extreme element to certain states, including my own of Massachusetts, that are reacting in that there are legislators that want to legalize abortion right up till after the baby's born. On the other hand, I'm concerned of states that are going to completely ban abortion, because I do think that there are situations where the life of the mother is at risk, and that has to take precedence. Maybe that's, in this sense, maybe a more Jewish view of it. We put the living, the mother first. And I think that's where you and I may not agree. I don't know. But either way, I mean, the two extremes, I think, are going to be moderated by state legislators, because state legislators consist of people from all various ideologies and points of view, and they have to agree at some point in order to create law. So you have a somewhat of a moderation, which is where I hope we end up.
I think that some states, as they already have, are going to ban abortion outright. Some, I would say, the big abortion states, New York, Illinois, California, are going to have abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy and perhaps even longer. Yeah. When all of this began to percolate a few years ago, New York State passed a law that's the most extreme in the world, and that includes allowing non-medical personnel to perform abortions. That is a huge change. Wow. But then, I think, like I said, I think that there's going to be gestational limits that, see, if you make it, incest, rape, save the life of the mother, we're probably talking about 0.002% of abortions. So right. It's minuscule. But so when you're saying that most a gestational limit, something like 92% of abortions are performed for no reason. That are
just because the mother wants it.
They're basically abortions as birth control. And you see, so 15-week gestational limits will allow for abortions for convenience like that. And see, that's why the pro-life movement will never give up. And so it's going to be a very interesting 50 years,
Right. No, that's right. And I think that even some people on the far left are uncomfortable with abortion, mainly because there's a movement there that recognizes that the founder of modern abortion in America, legal abortion, Margaret Sanger, who is also the founder of Planned Parenthood, was an inveterate racist. She loved Hitler. She wrote articles talking about dysgenic races. And she set up abortion clinics in Black neighborhoods and bribed Black ministers as front people to do abortions because she wanted to cull Black people, not not for very, not for holy reasons here. This was,
and a lot of people who support abortion don't understand the true history of Margaret Sanger.
Right. It's a eugenic movement. And so you have a combination of some people on the left who now understand that, and also Black people who understand this, who are not comfortable with abortion. And I think that that is a trend for the better, in that they're recognizing that there is a eugenic element to abortion.
Well, good golly, I mean, consider that more Black children are aborted in New York State than are born. There's a whole movement in the pro-life movement of Black pro-lifers that refer to the Black genocide. And if you point this out on social media, that such a thing is happening, you know what they call you? They call you a racist. They call you a racist because you want more Black babies. And in my own work, I mean, we work to protect Black babies in Africa from the liberals of the white liberals of the United Nations and the European Union, and we're called racist for bringing this up. I mean, it's a topsy-turvy world.
You mean for bringing up things like forced sterilizations without telling women?
And the experimental drugs like Depo-Provera that they use on African women, but they're not allowed to use here in the United States because it's dangerous. I mean, this Bill Gates all over it.
Yeah, that, and also there's this woman on The View. I don't watch it. I just heard about it. This Navarro, who
Anna Navarro.
Yeah, I think she expressed sentiments that usually are not spoken out loud by the left, when she said that she has a special needs stepson and a special needs brother, and she was complaining about the fact, essentially, that they were not killed, that there was not an abortion. I mean,
it was an odd thing to say. Well, I mean, consider that in
this
Iceland,
is underneath this. This is like a percolating just under the surface. This could have been said by, when Hitler imposed the eugenic project on disabled and disfigured Germans.
Started that way,
right? I mean, what they referred to as life that is not worth living.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, really dark and despicable. And I just, and she was so cavalier about it that I think that people they don't understand it because they're dealing with what they call in sociology, collective somnambulance. They're just like asleep. They don't realize what they're hearing. And it takes groups like yours to gradually wake people up.
Well, not long ago, and maybe it was last year, but there have been further developments. Iceland announced that they have done away with Down syndrome. How have they done that?
Murder.
By targeting every single Down syndrome baby in utero and killing them.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's no more Down syndrome in Iceland.
That is so evil and so wrong. I mean, Down syndrome people are great people. I mean, this is insane. To have that.
It is quite remarkable. And here I'll do a little chest thumping for Catholics. Probably the last place where Down syndrome children are fully embraced and welcomed are in Catholic families. And I know half a dozen Catholic families around where I live who have children with Down syndrome. And they are welcomed because I wrote a book years ago called Littlest Suffering Souls, Children Whose Short Lives Point Us to Christ. And one of the children I wrote about lived a couple of miles from where I'm sitting right now, died of leukemia, but he had Down syndrome. And we consider him to be a saint in heaven. They're quite remarkable people and tend to be a blessing to the families that they're born into, but not every religious denomination recognizes this.
Well, I mean, I'd also say that among the very Orthodox Jewish groups, you have the same phenomena. You've got Down syndrome, right? And they're anti-abortion and they value life. But unfortunately, it chagrins me to say that the high ground of American Judaism is controlled by the Sabbatean left, who are pro-abortion. I'm not going to.
What?
No, well, leave it. It's a movement within Judaism that's evil.
Oh, but I've never heard of it. What word did you say?
The Sabbatians.
Huh. And
Yeah.
is this a particular teacher or a theology?
It goes back to the teachings of a false Messiah that corrupted a large portion of Judaism by the name of Shabtai Zvi. After he was exposed as a fraud in 1666, and he was evil. He was like he was satanic. He was inverting the Torah. Everything the Torah says, you do the opposite as a way to bring about the Messianic age.
Mhm.
After he was exposed as a fraud, his movement went underground. And according to many theories in Judaism, they infiltrated, they became secretive, and that there was kind of a quiet war between them and the Orthodox rabbis who were Torah true and who were conservative, that went on for centuries, but that they have achieved the high ground in Judaism today, and especially in America, in groups like the ADL and others.
I did not know. That's very interesting.
My theory, okay, and I hope I don't get in trouble for it, but whether I'm right or not, I think it is safe to say that the Jewish institutions of America are very liberal when it comes to these issues.
Yeah.
And that I think that this decision, this Roe versus Wade decision, is knocking them on the backside, and it could be an opening for Torah true and conservative Jews, like myself in a small way, but certainly like Orthodox Jews, to start to show this as being the fact and taking back the covenant between God and the children of Israel. And
I'd also never heard the phrase Torah true. I think the phrase Torah true is very interesting too. Is that your formulation?
No, that's a phrase that's used by Orthodox Jews. People who believe that the Torah is true, is the word of God, and that the covenant between the Jewish people and God is forever, as Jesus himself, by the way, said, who was a devout Jew.
Do you know the work of an Orthodox Jew by the name of Yoram Hazony?
No, I don't, but I'll look into that. Maybe I can have him on my show.
He published a book a couple of years ago called The Virtue of Nationalism. He, as an undergraduate, founded the conservative newspaper at Princeton called the Princeton Tory. He's married, he has 11 children, he lives in Tel Aviv, and he's the founder and leader of a new conservative movement here in the United States called National Conservatism.
Wonderful.
And I commend him to you.
Thank you.
I love him dearly, and he's very inspirational. Orthodox Jew. Anyway, just a fascinating guy, young guy. I think he's like maybe in his mid 40s. But he holds these conferences where like 500 people come.
Oh, that's amazing.
I spoke at the last one in Orlando last fall. But Yoram Hazony is who you should look up, and his book, The Virtue of Nationalism, in which he explains very important things about, and he defends the United States as a Christian nation.
Sure, so do I. You bet.
I mean, it's really a beautiful thing.
I thank God for that. Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, but I'm going to look into that. But anyways, it's a great day for one that I mean, who could have expected? I personally think it also has to do with, and I could get in trouble for this, but I think that the election of Donald Trump was providential. The fact that he was in that place and that he was able to do what he did, and that he got 3 judges appointed, not to mention judges around the country who are Constitution true, never mind Torah true. I mean, the Constitution is not inconsistent with the Torah, by the way.
It started with he beat Hillary. I don't know that Jeb would have beaten Hillary that year. And even if he had, he wouldn't have necessarily picked these 3 men. And Amy Coney Barrett. John McGahn, I think his name is McGahn, who's the lawyer in the White House helping to pick judges. He said what they were looking for was not just people who expressed constitutionalism, but people who had shown bravery against great odds in their life. Because they knew that these guys were up against it, and they needed to have the courage, which John Roberts lacked, to do the right thing. And so I mean, hats off to Trump, to McGahn, to Leonard Leo, and all the people who were
The
able
Federalists,
to
yeah.
particular people. And I'm a Catholic. It happened on a very important feast day, the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It happened on the feast of the birth of St. John the Baptist, who leapt in his womb, when Mary came up with pregnant Mary came up with Jesus. And also my friend Jay Richards from the Heritage Foundation pointed out that the night before the decision, the planets were aligned with the moon. There's so many signs that this was that this was a magical theological moment.
That is fascinating. And I also think that Clarence Thomas, a Catholic, by the way, I think he's been waiting for 30 years for this.
Yeah.
And it's now safe to say that this is his court. And,
I think that's exactly right.
That's exactly right. And that Roberts is a phony who's been knocked on the side. And that you now have people who are unabashedly looking at the Constitution, and they have courage, because you have murderers out there. You've got agitators and insurrectionists in our government right now, including, by the way, some very ultra-liberal Catholics like Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden. So it's not just Jews that have a problem here. I mean, the Catholics have their own.
A lot of problems here too, pal.
Yeah, they've had their own infiltration by false messiahs, like Adam Weishaupt. But we
call it Freemasonry.
Yeah, and the Illuminati of Weishaupt, which I think did a pretty good job of infiltrating the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church is stronger than Judaism, because you've got a hierarchy, you've got a pope, you've got nations, you've got armies, you've got this infrastructure that's incredible. And I don't think it's so easy for satanic elements to infiltrate that as it is Judaism. So
we were invaded by homosexual priests who wreaked great damage on our church and drove many people away from the faith, closed down churches and schools because of the financial penalties, because of pedophilia. So we were invaded too. We were not protected. The devil knows who his enemies are. The church, and by that I include you guys, and the family. Starting back in the Garden of Eden, but also, in the French Revolution, it's very clear that Satan knows who his opponents are, and therefore he goes after them red tooth and nail.
And every generation has these subversives who we have to deal with. And the best way to deal with it is what you're doing, what in a small way I try to do, but what a lot of good people do, which is to expose it and to call it out and to hold it up for a public view. That's why that was the whole theory of our founding fathers. I mean, that you would have a diffusion of power and you would have free speech so that people could investigate genuine corruption of all types, moral and political. And that's what we're trying to do here. That's all. Let people judge for themselves. But when they have the information in front of them and they have, they usually make the right judgment. And that's, I think, especially true on the issue of abortion. So now it's up to groups like yours and others to make sure that the American people are properly educated on what we're talking about here, and that we don't become propagandized by this enemy that is the mother of lies and that is willing to spread falsehoods to try to push an agenda that has nothing to do with helping anybody.
Since I think we're winding down here, I would also point out one thing to you and your listeners and viewers. God called us right here, right now, to defend his creation. Yea, from the beginning of time, he knew that all of this was going to happen. And who did he send? He sent the likes of us. How ridiculous is that? I like to say, the apostles weren't exactly the A-team, and we're not the A-team either. My joke is that, he sent us, so that he could get all the credit. Those guys couldn't have done it without me. And that's true. And that's not a problem. But we have to rejoice that he sent us right here, right now. And we can't be afraid of all the cultural snipers around us. We have to embrace the time. It is a remarkable, as I say in the book, it's a remarkable, there's never been a finer time to be a faithful Catholic. I would say there's never been a finer time to be a faithful Jew than right now.
Right. Not to mention Protestants even. They're
Yep.
putting them aside.
Even
Austin, where can people get your excellent book and information about your organization?
all of my books are available at Amazon. I wrote a book that I think people ought to read called Fake Science, where I take apart the scientific claims of the left. Also, the Littlest Suffering Souls book. My latest book is Under Siege, No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. I have a book that I did during the campaign called The Catholic Case for Trump, which people are going to need again because, golly, you never know what's going to happen. And people can check out my organization, c-fam.org, c-fam.org. It's full of great information about the fight for life and family at the United Nations.
Excellent. Austin, let's stay in touch. I'd like to do some more programming. I'd like to do a show on your book about science and faith too.
Oh, that'd be fun.
All right. Excellent. Thanks so much, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Be well.
Thank you. You too. God bless.